It might seem strange, absurd, even that some of the deepest, most restful sleep in human history happened not on feather beds, not in kingly chambers, but in smoke-darkened wooden huts. Huts full of fur, fire, and frost. Today we chase rest, with machines, white noise, boxes, blackout curtains, cooling gels, and ASMR playlists. But the Vikings, they had none of it. And somehow they drifted off more easily than most of us ever will. I'd love to know where in the world you're listening and what time it is for you. Let me know in the comments below. Could it be that those who lived without clocks slept better than those who lived by them? Stone, fire, silence. These were the materials of the Viking night. Not merely things, but textures, experiences. A Viking longhouse was not designed for comfort in the modern sense. The walls were thick and rough, made of timber and turf. The roof was steep and thatched with straw or sod. The only light came from the hearth, and from whatever stars dared peek through the roof beams. No windows, just shadows. Yet in that deep darkness, bodies surrendered to stillness. Wrapped in wool lying on straw-stuffed skins, they slept with their breath visible in the cold. Their dreams softened by the whisper of fire and the closeness of others. Inside the longhouse felt more like a ship turned upside down, its curved beams like ribs overhead, cradling the sleepers in a quiet belly of wood and smoke. The smell of the fire, always burning low, mixed with the animal musk from goats and pigs, penned at the other end of the house. The floor was packed earth, sometimes raised with wooden planks, and where one slept was dictated not by status, but by proximity to warmth. The center was for the old, the young, the sick. The outer edges were for the strong. Everyone slept in their clothes under heavy wool or fur, side by side, sometimes with dogs curled at their feet, always with the sound of others breathing. You didn't sleep alone in a Viking world. There was no concept of a private bedroom, no locked door, no turning off the light. The fire stayed lit. The night was communal. And outside, that firelit world, cold silence. Not the kind of silence we know today, interrupted by passing traffic or buzzing wires. No, this silence was bigger, older. The wind outside moved through the forest like breath through lungs. The sea never far might sigh against the rocks. Snow fell without sound. Even time seemed to slow, and inside, sleep happened not in a rush, not chased or scheduled, but aloud, like a tide coming in, slow, certain, irresistible. If someone stirred in the night, they didn't panic. There was no glowing phone to grab, no email to check. Waking up at night was part of the rhythm. Sometimes they would sit up, stoke the fire, talk quietly with a neighbor, maybe recite a line from a saga. Then just as calmly, they would lie back down, fall asleep again. No hurry. In some long houses, embers were pushed into little stone cradles to keep them glowing through the night. A red heartbeat at the center of the dark. Imagine that now. You in your room, your body tense from the day your thoughts a-buzzing. And then imagine stepping into that other world. A world without screens, without light switches, without notifications. Only darkness, fire, and stone. Only the breath of the person beside you, steady and warm. Only the creak of beams overhead, the shifting of dogs on the floor, the settling of dreams in the air. This wasn't a vacation. This was life. And yet doesn't it sound like something we long for, stripped down to what's essential, what's old? We spend our nights now trying to quiet the noise we've built around us. They, without meaning to, lived in quiet already. They slept not in soft beds, but in soft rhythms. Not on silence, but in it. And in that quiet, something else happened too, dreams. But we'll come to those later. For now, rest in this simple image. A wooden house, a red fire, a blanket of fur, cold on your face, warmth on your feet, and time no longer chasing you, no alarms, no schedules, just the long nights stretching like a lullaby, and the slow hush of stone, fire, and silence. The hearth was not just a source of warmth, it was the beating heart of the Viking home. By day, it cooked their meals. By night, it cradled their sleep. Its glow flickered across the timber walls like a living spirit, casting long shadows that swayed with the smoke. It spoke in pops and crackles in small sighs of burning wood, and all who slept nearby moved to its rhythm like moths curled not in flight, but in rest. Vikings did not chase dreams in solitude. They curled around the hearth like wolves in a den, their bodies forming a living ring of breath and quiet muscle. Husbands, wives, children, elders, even the occasional guest, they shared the warmth, the firelight, and the silence. They slept facing each other back to back, or chest to back, a tangle of limbs and furs. No mattress, just straw sheepskin and the slow pull of sleep. The fire never truly went out. It was banked, kept alive with coals buried in ash, glowing faintly through the night, like a patient eye. Someone always woke up to feed it often, the old woman bent with years, her hands steady from repetition. She would rise without rush, add a stick or two, and then sit for a moment in the stillness. Perhaps she would whisper a prayer to Frigg, goddess of the hearth and home, then return to her place on the floor, lowering herself beside the sleeping huddle like a falling leaf. In those moments the fire wasn't just fire, it was memory. It was story. The Vikings' beloved the hearth connected them to their ancestors, those who had tended fires before them. When flames danced in the longhouse, they danced in time with something older than speech. And so drifting to sleep by that light meant surrendering not just to rest, but to belonging. A mother might murmur a tale as the fire settled her voice, softer than the wind outside. Not a full saga, just a fragment. A boy with a sword, a ship of bones, a god who dreamed the world into being. These stories were not entertainment, they were spells, and they stayed in the air long after the words had stopped. The body slowed, the breath deepened, and gradually, one by one, they all surrendered. Today we seek rituals for better sleep, lavender sprays, meditation apps, sleepy teas. The Vikings had no such products. Their ritual was built into the house itself. The hearth's warmth eased the body. The darkness calmed the eyes. The closeness of others settled the heart. And there was one more thing, something modern sleep often forgets. They were tired, not exhausted from overthinking or screen fatigue, but physically, elementally tired. Tired from hauling wood, hammering iron, grinding grain, climbing hills. The kind of tired that lives in your thighs, your shoulders, your ribs. And when that kind of tiredness meets the warmth of fire, there is no resistance. Sleep arrives not as an intruder, but as a friend. It may seem odd now, sleeping so close to others, to livestock, even with no walls, no beds, no curtains. But in truth, this kind of sleep was honest, unhidden, natural. There was no shame in snoring, no fear of waking up tangled in someone else's dreams. Even sleep sounds, the groans, the murmurs, became part of the night's music. And when someone stirred, it didn't disrupt the rhythm. It folded back in, like waves brushing shore. Imagine now in your own quiet room the thought of that fire, its warmth on your cheek, its smoke in your hair, the steady breath of someone beside you, the knowledge that you are not alone. Not even in sleep. We often chase silence as if it were the answer. But perhaps what we're missing isn't silence, it's rhythm. The rhythm of shared space, shared stories, shared breath. The rhythm of a hearth that burns through the night. Because sleep in the Viking world wasn't a retreat from the day, it was a continuation of it, a different kind of gathering, one that needed no words, only warmth and time, and the hush of fire settling into its last red glow. There's something comforting in the idea, isn't there? That long before electricity, before central heating, before memory foam, humans found a way to sleep deeply, together, gently, and all it took was a fire. The night air in Viking lands could bite. Even in the heart of summer, the chill from the fjords crept in like a careful whisper, and in winter it wrapped around the longhouse with icy fingers, rattling the timbers, testing the roof. But inside, under layers of wool and fur, Vikings slept like stones in snowdrifts, still and warm. Their bedding wasn't luxurious. It was practical. A mix of animal skins, thick hand-woven wool, straw-filled mattresses, sometimes lined with moss or dried leaves. If it itched, no one complained. If it smelled like sheep or salt, that was life. And oddly enough, this rugged mix created a kind of cocoon. The body warmed the layers trapped the warmth, and soon the cold outside became irrelevant. They didn't chase softness. They chose heat, and not just body heat. Fat played its role, too. Before bed, they'd eat meals that modern diets might flinch at: hearty stews, slabs of smoked meat, dense breads. Meals meant to linger in the belly, to burn slowly through the night. And with that fire inside and fur outside, the body became a furnace. Sleep followed. There's something peaceful about the heaviness that comes after a thick meal. The way the eyes lower, the limbs slacken. The Vikings knew that feeling well, and they leaned into it. Children often slept, tucked against their parents under shared skins. The youngest were swaddled tight, like little loaves of warmth. Even infants, too small to speak, learned early that the world at night was not to be feared. It was thick, dark, and safe. Outside, the wind could howl. Inside, there was only the rustle of wool, the small click of shifting bones, the sigh of a house alive with dreams. Imagine a child in that world, lying beside a mother who smelled of smoke and milk, listening to her slow breath. No nightlight, no lullaby recordings, just the faint heartbeat of the house and the feel of warmth that didn't come from a plug or a switch. The wool was scratchy. The skins were heavy. The cold nipped the nose. But the body, tired, fed, wrapped, knew what to do. It let go. In modern homes, we're taught that sleep comes best in silence, stillness, isolation. But in the Viking world, sleep was a shared surrender, a quiet group act. No one slept in shame. No one worried if they snored. No one needed a separate space to rest their mind. And something else happened in that closeness. Dreams flowed differently. Stories drifted between sleepers, half heard, half remembered. A father mumbled in his sleep. A child stirred and whispered a name. A mother opened one eye, smiled, and returned to the dream she had left behind. These weren't just individual nights. They were woven nights, tapestries of breath-cloth and memory. Outside, frost gathered on the roof. Inside, sleep pressed down like snow on fur. And every now and then someone might wake. They would hear the creak of the beams, the low groan of a shifting pig in the animal pen, the flutter of flames rekindled by an old woman's hand. And then, stillness again. There's a kind of trust in this kind of sleep. Trust in the fire, trust in the people beside you, trust that the house holds, that the cold stays out, that the night won't ask anything more of you. We often lose sleep over what-ifs, over emails, over news. They lost sleep only to wake up briefly, and then let it take them again. Even the warriors, used to the cold of raids and the clank of steel, let their bodies melt into the hides at night. Even they knew the gift of sleep, not a weakness, but a ritual, one that made you stronger come dawn. There's an image that lingers, a Viking boy, no more than 10, curled in a wool cocoon, his toes pressed against his sister's leg, a half-eaten piece of dried fish still clutched in one hand. His breath fogs the air above him. His dreams are full of ships, gods, dragons. He will not remember them, but the body remembers. The warmth, the weight, the quiet. That's what made sleep so deep, so complete. It wasn't a product. It wasn't bought. It was earned, built, wrapped, shared. And in that simple world of wool skin and ice, there was a peace we rarely find now. A peace that came not from comfort, but from enoughness. From knowing that even in the cold, sleep would find you and keep you. At night, the Viking longhouse didn't fall silent. It became a gentle symphony. Not the silence of vacuum or void, but the kind of living quiet filled with breath, shifting straw, and the low music of rest. There were no engines, no electric hum, no distant sirens, only the steady crackle of the hearth and the occasional cough from the far end of the room, a child turning over in her sleep. The flap of a bird's wings in the rafters, someone dreaming out loud, soft nonsense half-words. It was all part of the soundscape. To sleep in that sound was to be held. Not isolated, not separated, but embraced. The Viking longhouse was one room, yes, but it contained many layers. Each corner sang its own song. Chickens murmured in their baskets. A dog thumped its tail in a half-dream. The elderly muttered their prayers as they lay under sheepskins. The young whispered secrets before sleep took them. Even snoring had a place. It echoed gently through the beams, rhythmic like waves against a boat. Not annoying, expected. One snore became the beat to which others fell asleep, and outside the walls the world had its own rhythm. The wind coiled through the trees. Rain fell soft or sharp, but always steady. The sea, if it was close enough, moved like a sleeping giant's slow, deep breaths. In winter, snow softened everything, dulling, even the creak of ice, shifting beneath itself. Inside and outside, blurred. There was no insulation, no soundproofing, only wood, wool, and weather. So the outside world was not blocked, it was woven in. This is how they slept. Not cut off from nature, but surrounded by it. Not retreating from noise, but finding calm within the living chorus. A cow, lowing softly in its sleep, didn't wake a Viking. It reminded them the herd was well. A dog's bark might mean a fox nearby, but no one leapt from bed. They knew the rhythm of the land and trusted its patterns. Compare that to now. White noise machines mimic rain. Calming apps simulate ocean waves. Sleep podcasts replicate crackling fires, all to recreate what the Vikings had without trying. But there's a catch. The Vikings didn't listen to these sounds alone. They heard them together. The longhouse was one shared ear, and in that shared listening, a kind of collective sleep emerged. When one stirred, another might shift in response. When the fire sighed, someone sighed back. When the wind moaned, no one panicked. They simply pulled the fur up higher. Children grew up knowing these sounds from birth. The hiss of meat on the hearth, the footfalls of boots at dusk, the sleepy shuffle of someone stepping outside to relieve themselves, all part of the nighttime song. Nothing needed to be silenced, nothing needed to be hidden. Even laughter found its way in sometimes. A whispered joke, a muffled chuckle, a child hiccuping in their sleep. And in that atmosphere, loose low, without tension, sleep descended like fog. It didn't ask permission. It simply arrived. People drifted off at different times. There was no bedtime, no scolding for staying up too late. The sun dictated rhythm, not rules, and so while someone might still be weaving or sharpening a blade, another would already be deep in dreams. But eventually, all slowed. The woman spinning wool let the spindle drop. The child's questions faded mid-sentence. The dog curled tighter, and the room became one big breath. Modern sleep is often about isolation, soundproofing, blackout curtains, headphones. Viking sleep was about surrender to the night, to the sound, to each other. There is a softness in that thought. That sleep once belonged not to the individual, but to the house itself. The house slept, and you were part of that sleep. Imagine lying in that room, your eyes closed, the fire warm on your cheeks, the air cold in your nose, the sounds all around you quiet but present. You are not alone. You are not expected to wake early. You are not being watched by a clock. Sleep here is not a break from the world, it is a joining, a merging with breath, wood fire, wool sea. There's something beautiful about that symphony. Not perfect, not silent, but true. And in that truth, rest. They called it first sleep and second sleep, not because they were inefficient sleepers or troubled by insomnia, but because that's simply how the night worked. In the deep north, where winter nights could stretch across 16 hours, the Viking people didn't try to conquer darkness with activity. They moved with it, slept with it, twice. The first sleep began not long after dusk, after the evening meal had been shared, after the hearth had been tended, and after the wool spinning and quiet talk had ended. People lay down, not always with fanfare, just a quiet settling of bodies. Slowly, one by one, the house exhaled, and sleep came. This first sleep lasted 4, maybe 5 hours. It was heavy, deep, the kind of sleep that pulled you down fast, like falling into cold water, then warming as you sank. But then, something shifted. It didn't happen with everyone at the same time. But somewhere around midnight, after the body had rested well, but before the world stirred again, many people would naturally wake. No panic, no guilt, just awareness, a quiet mind, a resting body, a small flame still glowing in the hearth. They didn't reach for a distraction. There was no glowing rectangle to unlock, no curated feed to scroll. Instead they spoke, softly, calmly, in the middle of the night. It was called the watching hour or the quiet hour or nothing at all, a time not between sleep and wakefulness, but within them, a place of in-between. They might talk with the person beside them about dreams, about memories, about plans for spring. They might stretch, walk to relieve themselves, stir the fire. They might pray. Some might rise to check on the animals. Others might sit alone in thought. No one expected you to stay asleep the whole night. That was a modern invention. Instead, they embraced this second rhythm, wake then, sleep again. This second sleep was lighter, more dream-filled, a return, not a restart, and they would wake in the gray light of morning with no sense of failure, no sense of having broken the night, because the night was not one solid block. It was a tide. Come in, go out, come back in. How different this is from our lives today. We wake at 3 a.m. and panic. We tell ourselves something is wrong. that our body has betrayed us. We try to force sleep back as though it were a switch we forgot to flip. But maybe that hour is not brokenness. Maybe it is ancient. Maybe the body remembers what the mind forgets. Even now, some people wake in the middle of the night every night without reason. Their sleep divided into two parts. Not a disorder, a memory, a long echo of a time when night was long and quiet and full of space. There's something sacred in that middle moment. Imagine the house asleep, yet not silent. The fire still breathing. A loved one beside you awake as well. You whisper something, maybe a joke, maybe a line from a story, and you both smile. There's no rush. There is still time to return. And when you do, when you pull the fur up to your chin and close your eyes again, the second sleep takes you gently. No falling this time, just floating. The dreams that come now are different. Stranger, looser, more like driftwood on a dark current. The Vikings believed that dreams in the second sleep were closer to prophecy, that they came from deeper places, that the gods could whisper more clearly when the house was half asleep. Some took those dreams seriously, and in the morning over flatbread or buttermilk they might share what they'd seen, not as facts, but as invitations. Would we sleep better now if we gave ourselves the same invitation to drift, to pause, to speak, to return, instead of fearing wakefulness, to treat it as a companion on the journey, a quiet hour, a hearth-lit moment, a breath, and then onward, toward the second sleep. There was no such thing as sleeping alone in a Viking longhouse. Privacy, as we understand it now, did not exist between walls of timber and turf. Sleep was not hidden behind doors or separated by floors. It was shared like food, like warmth, like breath. Sleep was a communal ritual. Picture it a great hall, dim with smoke and shadow firelight, dancing over thick beams and fur-covered forms. Dozens of people, family servants, elders, children, all wrapped in wool and silence. There were no beds in the way we picture them. Instead, there were designated spots, some with straw and skin, others with a simple plank or blanket. No one locked a door, no one pulled a curtain shut. The night welcomed all. This intimacy might seem odd to us, trained as we are to associate sleep with solitude, but the Vikings found comfort in the nearness of others, in the warmth of shared bodies. In the subtle orchestra of sleep sounds the soft snore of an uncle, the creak of someone shifting position, a whispered name lost in a dream. In this closeness, vulnerability was not shameful. It was expected. There was no hiding the way you sighed in sleep, no disguising the way your body curled up against cold. Even flatulence or twitching limbs or night murmurs, these were all part of the fabric. The house held it all, absorbed it all, forgave it all, and in that forgiving space people rested more easily. No one had to perform stillness. No one had to hide their fatigue. When one woke, they might see the rise and fall of a chest beside them, the golden eyes of a dog watching from the corner, the flicker of the dying fire. All of it said you are not alone. Even guests were welcomed into this sleeping circle. Traveling merchants, visiting kin, even bards who passed through with stories and songs. They were offered food, a place near the hearth, and a spot to lie down. Hospitality wasn't just given, it was folded into the way sleep happened. Imagine the comfort of falling asleep beside a stranger, not in fear, but in trust. That was the Viking way, because to sleep together was to survive together. Heat was precious. The cold didn't care who had status or who had pride. It crept through the cracks all the same. And so closeness became necessity, and necessity became tradition. Children learned early what this meant. They learned the shapes of their parents in the dark, the sound of grandmother's breath, the way the fire smelled in the middle of the night. They learned to wake without fear because someone was always nearby, an arm to reach for, a body to lean into. Even lovers, when sleep found them, sank into the same communal hush. There was no separate chamber for romance, no secret bed, just the shared space and the rhythms of the house. Love did not separate it, blended. What must that do to the soul to sleep for years surrounded by the sounds of those you know and love? No sirens, no city hum, no walls filled with strangers, only the soft chorus of those whose stories you share. There is something ancient in that kind of sleep, something we've traded away in exchange for silence that isn't truly quiet, for walls that isolate more than they protect, for beds that comfort the body, but perhaps leave the spirit a little lonelier. When we think of deep rest, we imagine darkness and silence. But what if we also need the presence of others? What if part of our restlessness comes not from light or noise, but from distance, from the cold of sleeping alone, not just in space, but in heart? The Vikings didn't have a term for sleep hygiene. They didn't optimize their REM cycles. They simply lay down together and trusted the house to hold them, and when morning came, they stirred as one. Not all at once, but gradually. One yawn became another. One whispered prayer echoed into a cough or stretch. A pot was moved. A child giggled before fully waking, and the house returned to life. But for a time, in those deep hours of night, it had been one great animal, breathing, resting, dreaming. Together. And maybe even now we carry the memory of that, in our longing for connection, in our search for rest, in the part of us that doesn't want silence, just presence, not emptiness, but the low, steady music of others nearby. In the deepest shadows of the longhouse, where the firelight reached only as a faint shimmer, something else kept watch, the old gods. Not in the form of carved idols or painted runes, but in the stories whispered before sleep, in the quiet belief that Odin wandered the world in disguise, that Freya watched over love and loss, that the Norns, those weavers of fate, spun out each thread of dream with careful fingers. Sleep was not just biological, it was spiritual. The Vikings did not pray to their gods in rigid rituals like sermons. Their faith was woven into daily life, into storms, into harvests, into battle, and yes, into rest. The gods weren't distant. They were present. They might appear in dreams. They might lean close when you whispered your secrets in the dark. They might watch you sleep and slip symbols into your thoughts. A dream of a wolf wasn't just imagination. It could be a message, a memory, a warning, or a blessing. And so, sleep carried meaning. Imagine a boy lying awake, staring up at the black roof above. He listens to the gentle rustle of his father's breath, the low crackle of the hearth, the far-off hoot of an owl. And then from somewhere in the old stories passed down from mouth to mouth, a shape forms in his thoughts, a great tree Yggdrasil, with roots in every world. He drifts toward it, and sleep follows like a loyal dog. In that dream, he walks among gods, or maybe only hears them. He wakes with a strange certainty. No one tells him he was foolish. His mother says, pay attention to that dream. His grandfather nods, remembering one of his own. They do not explain it away. They respect it. The gods were not bedtime stories to calm children. They were presences that lingered, realities one entered when the body grew still and the world darkened. It wasn't just the gods who slipped through the night. The ancestors did too. The Vikings believed that the dead were not gone. They were near, in the earth, in the wind, in the fire. To sleep beside a warm hearth was to rest in the same glow as those who had tended it generations ago. Every crack in the longhouse beam, every mark on the wooden walls had once been touched by hands now dust. Sleep near, that you slept close to memory. This is not superstition. This is continuity. And it gave sleep weight, not heaviness, but importance. Closing your eyes wasn't escape, it was communion. And if the night was long, they didn't fight it. They let the fire burn low, let the wind sing its old song through the thatch, and let the gods come close. Not with thunder, but with a hush. Even warriors, those hardened by raids and cold steel, had their own rituals. A blade, always within reach. Boots near the bedroll. But when they lay down, they too surrendered to the silence, and in their minds they asked the gods to watch over them, not from fear, but from trust. It was said that the Valkyries saw the sleeping too, not just the fallen in battle, but those who dreamed with honor, those who carried courage even in slumber. Perhaps a Valkyrie stood once in the smoke of a longhouse, watching a young man as he whispered his fear of the sea into the ear of sleep. Perhaps she remembered him later when he faced it. There is comfort in thinking that sleep meant something more, that it was not just a space between tasks, not just recovery, but a meeting place, a soft field where gods and men spoke in the language of images. We no longer believe, perhaps, in Odin walking unseen, but we still dream of being seen, of being watched over, not in surveillance, but in care. When we close our eyes, something in us still hopes that the dark is not empty, that even in sleep we are accompanied. The Vikings knew that feeling, and they did not fear it. So tonight, as you lie back and listen to the slow wind of your own thoughts, consider this. What if your dreams are not meaningless? What if someone or something waits behind the quiet? Not to startle you, not to test you, but to simply keep you company. The light in Viking lands came slowly, especially in winter. Dawn was not a sudden burst, but a slow spreading of gray like warm milk poured into cold water. And because the day was short, the night was long. So long, in fact, that rest wasn't just permitted. It was sacred. No one shamed you for sleeping late when the sun hadn't yet touched the horizon. There was no scolding for being lazy on a day when daylight might only last 6 hours. Instead, people moved gently through the morning, quietly, respectfully. They understood something we often forget. When light is rare, rest becomes ritual. Even the animals moved slowly. Sheep stirred but didn't bleat. Dogs stretched, circled once, and settled again. Children blinked, yawned, and drifted back into dreams. And the fire was coaxed back to life, not rushed, just invited. Viking life in winter wasn't driven by alarms or schedules. It followed light. And when the light didn't come, you didn't fight it. You slept. Not all night, perhaps. There was work to be done. But sleep wasn't a thief of productivity. It was part of the rhythm. A woman would rise to bake flatbread before sunrise. But she might return to her blanket afterward and sleep again, with flour still on her fingers. A man might check the boats down by the fjord, breaking ice with an oar, and then return home before full morning, pulling the fur over his shoulders and sleeping until the second fire was lit. No guilt, no lectures, just understanding. In a world ruled by sun and storm, you didn't push against the dark. You floated inside it. Even the sagas speak in winter's hush. Heroes sleep through long, cold months. Stories pause. Time stretches. There's no climax, only breath. And this restfulness became a kind of wisdom. Winter taught them patience. The kind of patience that doesn't rush to solve everything in the same day. The kind that knows some things, like seeds, like trust, like healing, require stillness before they can grow. So the Viking people wove rest into their days, not as luxury, not as reward, as necessity. When the weather turned harsh, when the roads disappeared under snowdrifts, when the fields froze hard as bone, what was left? The hearth, the stories, the bodies curled in furs, and the sleep that came with acceptance. Even the gods in their myths rested. Odin, after wandering for days without sight, sat beneath the world tree and closed his eye. Thor, after battle, snored beneath a cloak of thunder. Rest wasn't whackness, it was returning. We tell ourselves we must earn our rest. They believed rest earned them, because in those long nights, your body rebuilt itself. Your thoughts untangled. Your wounds, whether from labor or sorrow, softened beneath wool and sleep. And there was no rush to leave that behind. The longhouse did not scold you for dreaming too long. The fire didn't judge if you stirred just after sunrise. The snow did not care. Only now, in a world flooded with light and speed and pings and urgency, does this seem radical. To rest without apology. To sleep when the dark invites you. To rise slowly when the light returns. What if we too followed that rhythm, not just once a year, but every day? What if we let ourselves wake when the body called, not when the phone buzzed? What if rest wasn't stolen time, but a sacred time? This is what the Vikings understood, that in the deep night, when the wind hummed outside, and the embers breathed low, the most powerful thing a person could do was nothing. Just sleep, and trust that the world would wait. There is something quietly beautiful in the way Vikings spent their evenings, without urgency, without noise, without glowing screens competing for their attention. When the sun slipped beneath the sea, and the light faded from the sky, they didn't scramble to fill the silence. They welcomed it, let it settle into their bones. They called it Gvöldvaka, the evening wakefulness, a slow, sacred time, after supper but before full sleep. No one rushed through it. It was a space for stillness, for simple work, for soft words. This was when the wool was spun, the thread drawn gently between fingers worn from sun and frost. No machines clicked, no buzz of fluorescent lights, just the quiet scrape of spindle against palm, and the murmur of a story told for the 100th time. Old men repaired fish nets. Mothers taught daughters to patch cloaks. Children sat cross-legged hands, busy with carved bone toys, half listening to the grown-ups. Sometimes a traveler would share news from the coast. Sometimes someone would sing. The songs were not grand or loud. They were slow-low, often sung without words. A melody repeated until it melted into the firelight, into the wood, into the straw beneath their feet. No one applauded. No one judged the voice. It was enough that the sound filled the dark. And then came the sagas. Tales not just of gods and monsters, but of neighbors, kin people, known to their grandparents. Names etched into memory like the lines in their hands. A story might begin in one corner of the room, passed like a bowl, across mouths and minds. One person speaking another, adding detail, another correcting, until even the youngest child could tell you what happened when Thor fished for the world serpent, or when Olaf the Silent laughed for the first time in years. They told stories not to impress, but to remember. because storytelling was their library, their history, their lullaby. And as the fire softened to coals, as the wind thickened against the thatch, their hands slowed, their breath deepened, their minds relaxed, not from boredom, but from belonging. This was not wasted time. It was the sacred art of doing nothing, not emptiness, but presence. They weren't numbing themselves. They were grounding themselves, preparing their spirits to enter that other world, the one behind the eyes. Even the simple act of watching the fire had meaning. The flames flickered like memory itself, alive, changing, unpredictable. They could hold a person's gaze for an hour. No conversation needed, just the dance of orange and gold against a darkened beam. And through all of it, no one checked the hour. There were no ticking clocks on the walls, only the pace of the fire, the weight of the body, the feeling of the night pulling gently at the edges. Even now, don't you feel it? That longing for slowness, that ache for quietness that isn't empty. We fill our evenings with noise because we've forgotten how to wait. Forgotten that peace isn't something that arrives. It's something we enter. The Vikings knew how to enter it. Through rhythm, through wool, through firelight, through stories. And so when they finally lay down, it wasn't because they were worn out. It was because they had already drifted halfway into sleep, like leaves carried downstream. No resistance, no chase, just the gentle art of surrender. And in that surrender, something stirred that we are only now beginning to miss. That feeling of being ready to sleep, not from exhaustion, but from fullness. The kind of fullness that comes when the day has given what it needed to give and taken nothing it shouldn't. You don't have to spin wool or memorize sagas to find that again. But maybe tonight, you could sit a little longer, watch a light flicker, tell a story even just to yourself. Let the night arrive, not as a wall you hit at the end of your tasks, but as a friend, sitting beside you, waiting to walk you gently home. Sleep for the Vikings often began with the fullness of the belly. Not excess, not gluttony, just the kind of deep satisfaction that comes from eating what your hands helped make. Food was fuel, yes, but it was also rhythm, and the rhythm of evening meals set the stage for rest. Imagine the smell in that longhouse as dusk settled, thick smoke from the hearth curling into the rafters, stew bubbling gently in an iron pot filled with root vegetables, dried herbs, and the last of the salted lamb, fresh flatbread cooked on hot stones, breaking open to reveal steam, a small pot of sour milk or ale passed around warm in the hand. No candles, just fire, no cutlery, just fingers, no rush. They didn't count calories or debate macros. They listened to the season, to the sea, to the soil. They preserved what they had smoked, dried, buried in cold cellars, or hung from rafters. What couldn't be grown was traded. What couldn't be traded was done without. And so when they ate at day's end, it was sacred. Even ordinary meals held a kind of reverence. To eat was to say we made it through another day. And after eating came the slowing. A body fed with warmth and fat and broth does not leap into action. It leans into stillness. Blood flows to the core. Limbs loosen. The head begins to nod. Even the eyes blur at the edges. This was their secret, not supplements or sedatives. Just fullness. Heavy bread, root stew, salted fish, food that weighed you down gently. That told the body, it's time now. Let go. Children often fell asleep before the bowls were cleared, a bite of oatcake still in their hand, a smear of butter on their cheek. No one shook them awake. Someone just lifted them carefully, laid them near the hearth, and pulled a fur over their shoulder. In the silence after the meal, no one demanded conversation. If words came, they came softly. Sometimes only the crackle of embers spoke. This stillness was known, expected. Even the animals settled into it. Dogs curled close. Goats shifted behind the wooden divider. The night exhaled. We tend now to eat while distracted. Screens flicker. Notifications chime. Meals are rushed, mechanized. Our bodies never know if the day has truly ended. But the Vikings knew, because they could feel it, not in their minds but in their bellies, in the heaviness that spread slowly through the limbs, in the calm that followed a warm drink and a quiet hour. They didn't snack before bed. They didn't worry about whether they should fast. They honored the ritual. Eat, rest, sleep. There's an image that lingers, an old man gray-bearded, wrapping a strip of dried fish around a hunk of barley bread. He chews slowly, staring into the fire, not thinking of tomorrow. His hands are calloused, his knees ache, but his face is peaceful. He has eaten, his house is warm, the sea is quiet. He lays back and sleep takes him before he can even finish the primer forming in his mind. What could be simpler? What could be more human? We've complicated rest, turned it into a performance. But maybe the path to better sleep isn't found in routines or gadgets. Maybe it's in something more ancient, something that comes after a warm bowl, a slow evening, and a belly that says, "You are safe, you are home, you are done." To sleep among Vikings was to enter a world where dreams carried weight, not only as fleeting shadows of the mind, but as messages, symbols, and omens. In a culture where the night held more than just rest, dreams were whispers from beyond the firelight. They believed dreams came from somewhere, that they were not simply tricks of memory or meaningless chaos, but gifts, sometimes warnings from gods, ancestors, spirits, or even from the land itself. When a dream lingered into morning, it was not brushed away like fog. It was spoken aloud, shared, interpreted. A dream of wolves running through snow might mean a storm was coming. A dream of drowning. Perhaps a sign to delay a sea voyage. A woman who dreamed of spinning gold thread might be pregnant with a daughter destined for beauty or sorrow or both. And no one laughed. No one rolled their eyes, because dreams were part of the rhythm of sleep, and sleep itself was not private. So neither were dreams. They might be murmured over breakfast, spoken in the same breath as weather or crops. I dreamt of my brother, someone might say, and that would be enough. Others would listen, nod, sometimes offer a story of their own, because most people had been dreamers. Even warriors told of dreams that came to them before battle visions of birds circling a ship, or of swords sinking into sand. Some believed the gods sent dreams to protect those who listened. Others thought dreams came from ancestors still watching from beneath burial mounds or sailing with the wind. Children, too, were asked about their dreams, and not just out of curiosity, but out of reverence. A child might dream what an elder could not, because children slept closest to the gods, some said, unburdened by pride, unclouded by toil. There's a tenderness in that thought, that the soft, strange visions of a child might be worth listening to more than the loud certainties of an adult. Not every dream was discussed, of course. Some were kept quiet, held close, tucked under the wool like a secret letter, but even silence had space in Viking sleep. They didn't rush to explain everything. Not every dream needed meaning. Some were simply honored by being remembered, and the remembering itself had power. In those long northern nights when the fire grew low, and the house, settled into its quiet, breathing dreams, drifted like smoke across the rafters. You might hear someone speak in their sleep. You might stir at the sound of your own name, whispered in a dream by a face you didn't know. And when you woke, there was no need to make sense of it all, just to carry the image with you. The sound of footsteps on frozen grass, the warmth of a sun you've never seen, the voice of someone long dead smiling. Even now, in the stillness of your own room, you might remember a dream from years ago, one that never left you, one that still feels real in some quiet part of your chest. Where did it come from? What did it mean the Vikings wouldn't try to answer? They'd simply nod, pour you a cup of ale, and say, "Dreams are old. Let them be." It's tempting to demand interpretation, to seek answers even in our sleep. But maybe rest comes more easily when we stop searching for meaning and simply trust that not everything needs to be solved, that some things are just meant to be felt. The Vikings understood this. They drifted into dreams as into mist, not with fear, not with control, but with openness. And when they awoke, they didn't try to drag the dream into the day. They carried it, gently, like fire wrapped in cloth. Out on the open sea, where the stars leaned close and the wind told stories of ice and iron, Vikings still slept. Even far from the comfort of their longhouses, rocked by waves and wrapped in salt air, they found ways to rest, to dream, to trust sleep even on the water. These were the sea sleepers. They sailed long ships with curved prows, dragon heads snarling into the wind. They crossed fjords, coastlines, and open ocean with no cabin, no sailcloth, shelter, nothing but their cloaks and the wooden ribs of the ship to cradle them. And yet they slept, not deeply, not always well, but with a kind of surrender that comes from knowing the sea has its own rhythm and that you are part of it now. At night, after the sails were lowered and the oars pulled in, the ship would drift, anchored if possible, otherwise tied to a rock, a tree, or simply to hope. The crew curled up wherever they could beneath benches, beside barrels, under firs, stiff with wind. Some lay back and stared upward, watching the stars move like gods across the sky. Others tucked themselves into their cloaks, face-buried boots still wet. The youngest might sleep with their head on a coil of rope, the oldest with a hand always resting on the hilt of a blade. The sea did not care for comfort, but still it offered peace. The lapping of water against the hull, the distant cry of a gull, the low groan of the wood shifting under your weight. These were lullabies, rough but real. They didn't sleep out of ease, they slept because they had to, because tomorrow might mean rowing for hours into rain, or fighting on a foreign shore, or simply surviving the cold. So rest, even when found on the hard planks of a ship, was cherished. Sometimes 2 or 3 shared a single fur. Their breath mingled in the salt air, their dreams tangled with the scent of tar, seaweed, and wool. And in those dreams, home returned. They saw the glow of the longhouse hearth, heard the voice of a mother, or the bark of a dog, felt the weight of sleep as it used to be, heavier, warmer, less uncertain. And then gently, the sea rocked them back into silence. You might think such a sleep was fragile, but it was not, because when the sea is your companion, your lullaby, your boundary, you learn to trust it, even when you fear it. A sailor who doesn't sleep becomes dangerous. His hands slow, his thoughts muddled, his footing unsure. The ocean does not forgive the restless. And so even in danger, the Vikings slept. They took turns, kept watch, shared responsibility. But everyone at some point in the night closed their eyes. And if the wind rose suddenly, if the waves began to roll, they woke. Fast, yes, but without panic, because sleep on the sea never went too deep. It hovered like a gull riding the updraft, ready to lift, ready to land again. And if a storm rolled in and no one slept for days, they knew how to make it up. One long nap on dry land, 1 hour under the sun with boots off, face to the sky, mouth open in the warmth. That was enough. They didn't track sleep in hours. They didn't measure rest. They felt it, trusted it. And when it was given by the sea, by the wind, by the gods, they received it like water in dry hands. This, too, is part of the Viking world. Not just the longhouses and furs, but the ships, the salt, the dreams adrift. A man sleeping under a carved prow, stars in his eyes, one arm resting over his chest as the tide rocks him. Not lost, just floating, just resting. Until the morning calls him back to oar and sail. In the far end of the longhouse, tucked under a fir, patched with age and memory, slept the smallest among them. Viking children. Hair-tangled cheeks flushed from the fire's warmth, their breath soft as the snow outside. And before they slept, they listened. Always they listened, because every night before the embers turned to ash came the stories. Not whispered lullabies, not lessons, not orders, but sagas. Stories of frost giants and trickster gods, of talking ravens and ships that flew through storms, of distant lands and ancient curses of warriors who could speak to wolves. They didn't need books. They didn't even need perfect memory. The stories were alive, and they lived in the voices of the grown. Some were short. Others stretched across many nights, picked up again where they left off, like a thread passed from one hand to another. The child who fell asleep in the middle of a tale would wake the next night already waiting for what came next. And in this rhythm the stories became part of the sleep. The boy who dreamt of Thor's hammer might wake, believing he'd held it. The girl who heard of Freya's cloak might dream of flying. Even the stories that were half true, passed down from their own bloodline, about a great-grandfather who crossed the mountains barefoot, or a mother who healed a man with herbs and whispers, were woven into dreams. Because in the Viking world, children were not too young for legends. They were closest to them, their minds still open, still flexible, like the first snow on the roof, ready to take any shape. So their dreams were not quiet things. They were vast, and the people around them nurtured that. They didn't say, "That's just your imagination." They said, "Tell me more." A child who spoke of a dream in which a giant walked across a frozen lake was not corrected, but heard. Did it speak? Someone might ask. What color were its eyes? The child, feeling the warmth of attention, would share more. And so imagination became memory. Memory became belief. Belief became identity. Children didn't sleep in separate rooms. They slept among stories, their heads resting against the past, their dreams building the future. Even their toys knew the old tales. Carved wooden dragons, little boats made of bark, cloth dolls with stitched runes on their bellies. The line between play and myth was thin if it existed at all. And that blurring was not a mistake. It was wisdom. In their dreams, children remembered things they had never seen. The color of sea ice, the face of a warrior mother, the whisper of a god leaning close. And so when the fire dimmed and the night deepened, the stories did not end. They passed silently into the breath of sleep. Imagine a little girl curled beneath a woolen cloak, the sleeve too long for her small arms, her father's voice still echoing in her head. and then Odin plucked out his eye and dropped it into the well. She clutches the edge of the cloak tighter, wonders what the eye saw, and as her own eyes close, she sees a well that stretches into stars. She smiles, and sleep takes her. These were not ordinary dreams. These were inheritances, passed down not through blood alone, but through myth, through language, through the hush between story and sleep. Modern life often tries to separate fiction from fact, dream from truth, play from purpose. But the Vikings, rough-hard, sea-weathered, as they were understood something softer, that the stories we tell our children become their truths. And the dreams that follow those stories, they become maps to courage, to wonder, to home. So if you ever wonder how a Viking child slept so soundly in a cold house, on a hard floor, beneath a sky full of storms, remember this. They slept surrounded by stories, and stories, when told with love, are the warmest furs of all. Winter in the Viking world was not an interruption. It was a season of stillness, of slowness, of sleep that stretched across long, dark hours like wool across a loom. When the sun dipped low in the sky and disappeared for weeks at a time, life did not resist. It listened, it softened, it surrendered. They called it skamdegi, the short day. But really it was the long night, and in those long nights, rest was not just allowed. It was expected. Work slowed. Travel paused. Fields lay quiet beneath frost. Even the animals moved less. So the people slept more. It wasn't laziness. It wasn't escape. It was rhythm, the body following the cue of the dark. A man who rose with the dawn in summer might rise hours later in winter, and no one would question it. A child who napped twice in one day wasn't seen as weak, but as wise. The cold carved out time to repair, to remember, to rest. The longhouse became a cocoon, holding heat, holding family, holding memory. Every movement was deliberate. Furs pulled close, firewood rationed, meals cooked low and slow. Conversation came in murmurs. Work became quieter, mending cloaks, carving combs, shaping arrowheads by firelight. And when the work ended, there was no rush to fill the silence. They simply leaned into it, laid back, closed their eyes, let sleep return again and again. Sometimes 2 naps a day, sometimes 3. Sleep came in fragments like snowflakes accumulating over days, weaving together in ways that didn't need tracking. There were no sleep schedules, no productivity hacks, just trust in the turning of the world. The young learned patience from the snow. The old remembered their first winters by the patterns of sleep, not the pages of calendars. Even the dogs moved slower. Imagine it a boy lying on his side, hand beneath his cheek, his feet nestled against the warmth of a dozing sheep. His breath curls into the air, his eyes flutter beneath the lids. Outside, wind whispers across frozen fields. Inside, nothing stirs. Time disappears. There was something sacred in that forgetting, that suspension of urgency, because winter did not ask them to perform. It asked them to pause. And in that pause, the body remembered what it was built for. Sleep was not something to be earned. It was something to enter, with reverence, with permission. The Viking sagas rarely speak of winter battles, rarely show raids in the coldest months, because everyone, even warriors, understood the power of waiting, the strength in stillness, the healing in sleep. For the wounded winter was medicine. For the grieving, it was balm. For the children, it was magic. Stories were told longer in slower voices. Games were played beside the fire. The shadows on the wall became part of the tale. And when they finally slept, they slept like seeds beneath snow. Silent, safe, becoming. We forget sometimes that sleep isn't just absence, it is transformation, and winter for the Vikings was a season of becoming, of resting deeply enough to emerge ready, of curling inward not to retreat, but to grow. And so, as snow piled against the walls and stars hovered long over the roof, they slept, not because they had nothing to do, but because the world itself whispered, "Now, now is the time." And they listened, because that was what the dark was for. Not fear, not loneliness, but return to the self, to the rhythm, to the quiet promise that even the coldest night carries warmth if we're willing to let it. In Viking times there were no ticking clocks, no glowing numbers, no hours marked by alarm bells or buzzing screens. The night unfolded at its own pace, quiet, slow, unmeasured. And because of that, rest found its place naturally like water, filling the low parts of the land. The idea of bedtime didn't exist in the way we know it now. There was only light and dark, only the rhythm of the fire, only the bodies saying, "It's time." And when it was time, they listened. No candle to snuff out, no clock to glance at with guilt, just the fire dimming, the room thickening with stillness, the eyes growing heavy. They didn't have to try to fall asleep. They didn't chase it, because they weren't pulled in 100 directions first. There was no screen waiting for one more scroll, no message to answer, no distant glow to remind them of what they hadn't yet done, only the moment they were in. And when the moment slowed, so did they. Even the children learned time by light and breath. The adults didn't say, "Go to bed, it's 9 p.m. They said, "The fire is low," or "Your eyes are heavy," or sometimes said nothing at all, just pulled a fur around a sleepy body and let the silence finish the sentence. Time was marked by fire, by the way it curled and sighed, and finally dropped into embers. And if someone woke in the middle of the night, there was no panic, no mental math. If I fall asleep now, I can still get 4 hours. They simply were awake, for a little while, then not. The darkness held them like water holds a boat, not hurried, not still, just gently rocking. Some people might step outside in the night, not because they were restless, but because the stars were too beautiful to ignore. They'd wrap themselves in a cloak step, barefoot into snow, and stand beneath a sky so big it made the breath catch. No light pollution, no noise, just stars, and the wind, and the soft crack of frost underfoot. Then back inside, back under the fur, sleep waiting patiently. There was no FOMO, no late-night obligations, no sense of time wasted, because they knew night was meant for nothing. That's the paradox we live with now. We fight to make more time, but never stop using it up. The Vikings didn't try to control time. They belonged to it, and so their sleep wasn't measured in minutes. It was measured in fullness, in dreams remembered, in muscles relaxed, in breath shared with the person beside them. There's something freeing about that. To live in a world where rest doesn't have to be justified, where you don't feel guilty for yawning, where sleep is not a thing to be optimized, but a thing to be trusted. You closed your eyes because the night had arrived. That was enough. Imagine it now, a long house at midnight. No clocks, no screens, no voices, just the slow sigh of logs. A baby murmuring in sleep. A hand reaching across wool, finding another. Nothing to measure, nothing to prove, only the quiet, only the dark, only time unfolding, without resistance. Sleep came differently to warriors, not because they feared the dark, but because they had seen what hid inside it. Yet even those who held swords by day knew how to lay them down at night, because in the Viking world, even warriors needed stillness. Sleep was not a luxury for the soft. It was repair, a ritual as essential as sharpening a blade. After battle, there was no triumph in staying awake, no glory in restlessness. They didn't brag about insomnia. They healed through sleep. A man might return from a raid with blood on his boots, with bruises blooming beneath his tunic. He'd lower himself near the fire, breathing in the scent of meat and smoke and wet earth, and fall asleep before his cloak was fully unfastened. No speeches, no ceremony, just surrender, because the body after battle understands, and the house does too. The longhouse was more than shelter, it was recovery. It wrapped its warriors in wool and shadow. The warmth of the hearth soothed the aches. The presence of others' family kin, even livestock, reminded the fighter that he was still among the living, that he could let go. For now, even the fiercest among them knew the wisdom of silence after pain. They would speak little, eat slowly, stare into the fire longer than usual, and then one by one the warriors slept. No guards posted inside, no need to prove strength by resisting exhaustion, just the slow unclenching of a fist, the way breath deepens when a wound is clean, the way dreams come not to punish but to soften. Some might dream of the raid, of screams of steel, but more often they dreamt of home, of the path that led through the forest, of a mother's laugh, of snow falling in the old way, soft, swirling, silent. They did not speak of these dreams in the morning, but their eyes were calmer, their hands steadier, their silence gentler. Wounds on the body healed slower than those in the mind, but both began with rest, and the Vikings knew not to rush that. Even their myths remembered this truth. After his most brutal battles, even Thor returned to sleep. Odin wandered the world, yes, but he also sat, closed his eye, listened to the stillness beneath all things, because the strongest do not resist stillness. They understand it. Sleep was not a pause. It was the stitching of the self back together. In the morning, the warrior might rise early, test his arm, feel the pull of a scar. But for now, he is just another figure wrapped in fur, breathing, sleeping, human. That's what the longhouse offered, a place where even the strong could become soft for a while, where no one asked you to explain your weariness, where no one said, "Get up." Instead, they said, "Stay warm, rest, let the fire burn a little longer." There's a tenderness in that, a knowing that strength isn't in staying awake, always ready for a blow, but in letting the armor fall away just long enough to be whole again. You don't have to wield a sword to know that feeling. We all carry battles, some louder, some quieter, but still the body keeps score, and what it asks more than anything is time, silence, safety, the hush of the house at night, the warmth of skin and flame, the kind of sleep that doesn't erase the pain but holds it gently until morning. Sometimes in the middle of the night, someone would stir not from fear or restlessness, but from wonder, because in the far north, the night could offer beauty, so still, so quiet, so complete. It pulled even the sleepiest souls from their beds. Moonlight on the fjord, not just light, but silver poured across dark water. A ribbon stretching from the edge of the sky straight to the shore, reflecting not just the moon, but the hush of all things. A person might rise barefoot, careful not to wake the others. Push open the wooden door and step outside. The air cold, yes, but alive? And the silence, that full, round silence you only hear where snow rests on branches and wind moves like breath. Their eyes lift to the moon. Not a perfect white disk, but something with weight. Texture. A presence. Sometimes, if the night was just right, the northern lights would join her. Green ribbons rippling across stars, like spirits dancing, like gods weaving a story the living would never fully understand. And below, the fjord holds the reflection, a mirror, not of the face, but of the world. You could stand there a long time and forget your name. Forget the longhouse behind you. Forget the ache in your knees or the sound of goats sleeping. Forget even that you're awake, because this moment feels like dreaming. Some would whisper prayers. Others would say nothing, just feel. In a time before light pollution, the stars were so many. They seemed to have depth, like you could fall into them. And perhaps that was the point, to remind the watcher how small they were, and how grand the night could be. When they finally turned back toward the house, the moonlight might catch on the frost in their beard. The door creaked open. Warmth greeted them, smoke-wool breath. They would slip back beneath the fur. No one would ask why they'd gone. No one needed to, because in this world the night was not a thing to be escaped. It was a thing to be known. The Vikings didn't fear the dark. They lived in it. They listened to it. And they trusted what it showed them, not always with eyes, but with feeling. The fjord at night was not a distraction. It was a kind of conversation between the sky and the soul, between the water and the watcher, between silence and self. Even children understood this. Some would wake and see the moonlight slip across the rafters and think for a moment that a god had passed overhead. Some would dream of wolves howling at the aurora, only to wake and find the same green lights dancing above the roof. And so, the night blurred, not only between waking and sleep, but between real and myth, between what the eyes saw and what the heart remembered. That's what moonlight on the fjord did. It stitched the visible and invisible together, and for those who were lucky enough to see it, who stepped out into the cold, just long enough to let it in, it stayed, long after the fire had gone out, long after morning came, long after the snow melted, a memory not of words but of light, of standing between sky and water, of feeling the hush and being part of it. They called it the final sleep, but it was never spoken of with dread. Death in the Viking world was not a thief. In the night it was a guest who knocked gently and was welcomed when the time came. And when someone passed, their body was treated not as a cold object, but as a sleeper, one who had simply gone deeper into the night. The funeral rites reflected this. The dead were not cast away. They were tucked in, sometimes laid in a boat surrounded by their belongings, swords, beads, food, tools, not out of superstition, but out of care, the same way you might leave bread near someone sleeping, in case they wake hungry. Sometimes they were buried beneath mounds earth, piled like a second blanket, their grave facing a certain direction, a stone placed with thought, a story spoken, a silence shared. Even in death, the Vikings believed in comfort and in continuity. You didn't vanish when you died. You joined the long sleep. You moved into the stories. You became part of the firelight that flickered just a little differently now, and the living kept you close. The longhouse in the days after would be quieter, not out of fear, but respect. People would speak softly, sit longer, sleep a little heavier as though their dreams carried someone extra. Children might ask questions. Where did she go? And an elder might answer, she's with the others now. Which others? All the ones we speak of. This, too, was sleep, not one you woke from with the sun, but one you entered like stepping into the woods, slowly, gently surrounded by whispers. The burial itself was tender, sometimes ash and fire, sometimes earth and stone, sometimes ship and sea, but always a gesture of rest. A warrior placed with his hand still curled around a blade, not in defiance but in familiarity. A woman buried with her keys, her comb, her beads, not trophies, just the things her hands had known. The dead were honored with what they had touched, loved, built, and then left to sleep. No one checked if they were comfortable. They trusted that sleep would carry them now. They'd done enough. In the nights that followed, those left behind would feel the shape of absence, but not as a sharp edge. More like an open place beside them, a cool spot under the fur, a dream that spoke without sound. And over time, that spot wouldn't ache. It would soften. It would glow. Because the Vikings understood what is loved does not disappear. It joins the rhythm. And so sleep remained sacred, from the first nap of a child to the final breath of an old man beneath the stars. It was all part of the same river. No beginning, no end. Just motion, rest, silence. We fear death now. Resist it. Hide it. But the Vikings looked it in the eye and said, rest well. And when their own time came, they hoped for the same. A gentle night, a quiet house, a final breath that felt like sleep, because that's what it was. And in the dream beyond, perhaps they'd find the longhouse again, the fire still burning, the furs still warm, the voices waiting to greet them, and someone saying, you're home now. As seasons turned and generations passed, something curious began to happen. The line between dream and memory blurred. A grandfather would tell a story of his youth, and halfway through someone might ask, was that real, or was it a dream? And he would smile and say, what's the difference? Because in the Viking world, memories did not belong solely to the waking hours. Some lived in dreams, others drifted through stories, and many curled up beside the fire, waiting for someone to speak them aloud again. This was not confusion. It was continuity. When a child dreamed of a mountain of gold guarded by a snake, and her mother nodded, saying, that's just like your great-uncle's tale, that dream became part of the lineage, not questioned, not dismissed, included. So memories became layered, like woolen cloaks passed down and patched and repurposed. The shape changed, but the warmth remained, and sleep became a kind of passage, not just to rest, but to remembering. In the longhouse, as people slept in shared silence, dreams drifted between them like smoke. Sometimes they spoke of them aloud. Sometimes they didn't need to. The look in someone's eyes the next morning said enough. It wasn't important whether the thing had truly happened. It mattered that it felt true. And so over time, the dreams of the dead were remembered by the living. The story of a man who dreamed of wolves walking across frozen lakes, told again and again until no one remembered whether it happened or was simply dreamed. It didn't matter. The story lived. That was enough. There was a freedom in this way of seeing. You didn't need proof, only presence, only the soft conviction that something meaningful had passed through you during the night, and that it deserved to stay. We think now that history is made of facts, dates, names, but for the Vikings, History was made in the breath between people, in the hush after a tale, in the half-dreams that carried weight. They believed that what you felt in your bones was sometimes truer than what you could write down, and in that there was gentleness. If someone forgot a detail, changed a name, replaced a bear with a dragon, so be it. The story lived, the memory stayed warm, and isn't that the kind of remembering we all crave? Not the cold perfection of records, but the warmth of being carried, held, passed from one sleepy voice to another, sometimes around the fire, sometimes beneath a fir, sometimes in a dream that you couldn't shake even days later. A fisherman might dream of a silver fish that whispered his name. A child might wake and swear she heard her grandmother singing. A woman might sleep beside her newborn and dream that Freya walked through the snow just outside. They didn't write these things down. They lived them. Then they told them. Then they slept again. And in this rhythm, the Vikings remembered more than just their past. They remembered how to remember, with softness, with sleep, with story. Even now you may carry memories that don't quite fit. A dream that lingered for years, a scene you can't place, a moment that feels both real and impossible. Don't rush to discard it. Let it live. Let it warm something in you, because maybe it came from the same river of story. Maybe it was carried to you, from someone long ago, someone who dreamed by firelight, who whispered in sleep, who believed gently, fully that dreams are also a kind of memory, and that remembering is another form of love. And so now we return, not to an ending, but to a stillness, a pause, like the hush before snowfall. The Vikings are gone. The longhouses are timber bones beneath the moss. The fire has turned to ash. The ships sleep in the soil, but the way they rested, it lingers. Because while the world has changed, the night has not. It still comes soft and certain, and we, like them, still search for rest. We think we need more comfort, more silence, more tools. But perhaps what we really need is less noise, less pressure, less hurry. Because the Vikings had something we've almost forgotten: permission to stop. They didn't sleep because they'd finished all their tasks. They slept because the dark arrived. And that was enough. They trusted the body, trusted the rhythm, trusted the silence. Imagine now the night as they knew it. The fire dim, the furs heavy, a dog curled beside your feet, your sister's breath steadier behind you, the sound of the sea in the distance, the smell of smoke in your hair, and sleep arriving like an old friend. Not something to fight, not something to earn, just something to enter, like stepping through a door into warmth. You don't have to live in a longhouse to return to that. You only need to remember that rest is not the opposite of living. It is living. You are not a machine that must pause to recharge. You are a creature, a story, a flickering light, and light cannot burn always. It must dim, must rest, must renew. Even gods in their myths sleep. Even heroes in their sagas fall quiet. Even the strong curl up and close their eyes. The world will wait. The story will continue. But for now, let the fire burn low. Let the house fall still. Let the night gather gently around you, and sleep, as the Vikings once did, softly, fully, together. The Viking way of sleep was not built on luxury or isolation, but on rhythm, warmth, and deep communal trust. Through firelight, silence, and myth, they embraced the night as sacred. Their long winters encouraged slowness. Their shared longhouses wove dreams into memory. They welcomed sleep not as escape, but as a return into stories, into self, into stillness. In their world, rest was not rushed, measured, or earned. It simply was. And even now, their gentle relationship with sleep lingers as a quiet reminder that sometimes to lie down and close one's eyes is the most human thing of all. End of script. Good night.